The golden sun dipped low over Dubai International Airport, painting the glass terminals in hues of amber and rose. The hum of engines, the shimmer of heat rising from the runway, and the faint echo of Arabic announcements created a symphony of motion. A city forever awake. Inside the Emirates A380 first-class lounge, everything gleamed. Polished marble floors reflected the soft glow of chandeliers. Passengers dressed in designer suits murmured quietly, sipping coffee served in crystal cups. And amid that world of glamour sat Keanu Reeves, alone, calm and almost invisible. He wore a simple black hoodie, jeans, and a worn-out leather bag slung over his shoulder. No entourage, no cameras, just the quiet dignity of a man who never needed to announce his presence. A few passengers glanced at him, unsure if it was really the Keanu Reeves. He smiled gently to anyone who met his eyes. A soft, human smile that disarmed even the most skeptical heart. As boarding began, Keanu walked toward gate A14, his steps unhurried. The staff scanned his boarding pass and offered a polite nod, unaware of who they were greeting. The air smelled of jet fuel and expensive perfume as he entered the A380. First-class cabin, a floating palace in the sky. Gold accents, private suites, and silk pillows awaited him, but Keanu didn't seem impressed. He simply placed his book, The Power of Kindness, on the small wooden table beside his seat and gazed out the window. Outside, the desert glowed in the last light of day. The city skyline shimmered like a mirage, with the Burj Khalifa piercing the sky. The engines began to hum softly, and flight attendants moved gracefully through the aisles, their uniforms crisp and perfect. One of them, a young woman named Layla, approached him with the elegance of a queen. But her eyes carried an air of superiority. "Sir, would you like to see our first-class menu?" she asked, her tone polite but distant. Keanu smiled, voice low and kind. "Just some water, please." "Thank you." Layla hesitated, studying him. "Sir, the water service hasn't begun yet. You'll have to wait," she replied curtly, turning away. Keanu didn't respond. He simply nodded, his eyes following the orange horizon outside. The engines roared to life and the plane began to roll down the runway. In that moment, the contrast was striking. A man of global fame treated like no one special, and yet sitting in perfect peace. As the plane lifted into the clouds, the city lights of Dubai faded below, and a feeling lingered in the air, as if the sky itself sensed what was about to unfold. Keanu closed his eyes for a moment, whispered softly to himself, "Another journey, another lesson." No one on that flight knew it yet, but before they landed, this quiet man would turn a moment of disrespect into a story the world would never forget. The seatbelt sign blinked off as the Emirates A380 climbed steadily through a sea of golden clouds. The cabin lights dimmed to a warm amber glow, wrapping the first-class cabin in quiet luxury. Champagne glasses clinked softly, and passengers settled in, whispering about business deals, vacations, and exclusive parties in Europe. But at seat 1A, Keanu Reeves sat silently, the picture of calm. His headphones rested loosely around his neck as he opened his small notebook and began to sketch a few lines, perhaps thoughts for his next charity project or ideas for his motorcycle foundation. He wasn't just traveling, he was reflecting. Moments later, Layla, the same air hostess who had earlier dismissed him, passed by with a tray of sparkling drinks. She smiled warmly at the other passengers, but when her eyes fell on Keanu, her expression subtly changed. There was a trace of irritation, as if she couldn't understand why someone dressed so plainly was sitting among millionaires. "Excuse me, miss," Keanu said softly, setting down his notebook. "May I have that glass of water now?" Layla paused, her tone clipped. "Sir, I told you earlier. We'll start beverage service soon. You'll have to wait like everyone else." Her words carried an unnecessary sharpness, but Keanu didn't react. He smiled gently, his voice almost a whisper. "Of course, no problem." The passenger across the aisle, a businessman in a silver suit, raised an eyebrow. He recognized the face. "That's Keanu Reeves," he thought, his lips parting slightly in disbelief. "Excuse me?" the man said quietly to Layla. "Do you know who this is?" Layla frowned, clearly annoyed. "Sir, it doesn't matter who he is. All passengers are treated equally." The businessman smirked. "Then maybe treat them equally with respect, not attitude." A few passengers nearby began to murmur. The quiet cabin was no longer peaceful. Tension spread like static. Phones discreetly lifted as passengers began recording, unsure what was unfolding but sensing something wrong. Layla, embarrassed, adjusted her scarf and snapped back, "I'm doing my job, sir." Then she turned to Keanu, voice slightly raised. "And you, please don't make unnecessary requests during takeoff procedures." Keanu blinked slowly, taking in her tone. There was no anger in his eyes, just deep sadness. He nodded once. "I understand," he said softly. Then, in an almost fatherly tone, he added, "Sometimes how we speak says more than what we say." His words hung in the air like truth itself. A few nearby passengers exchanged looks of respect, while Layla flushed red. She turned sharply and walked away, pretending not to hear the faint chuckle from the man in the silver suit. Keanu leaned back, gazing out at the clouds again. The reflection of the sun painted his face in gold. Serene, unbothered, almost saint. But beneath that calm exterior, the energy in the cabin had shifted. Respect had been tested, and pride was about to make things worse. The air above 35,000 feet felt heavier than ever. What had begun as a quiet luxury flight from Dubai was now charged with quiet whispers and uneasy glances. Keanu Reeves sat motionless in seat 1A, staring out the oval window where clouds drifted like soft white mountains below. His calm face reflected the sky, peaceful, yet distant. But behind him, the entire first-class cabin had started buzzing. Passengers had noticed the scene. They'd seen the hostess, Layla, speak harshly to him, not once, but twice. And while Keanu had met her sharpness with quiet grace, the injustice was impossible to ignore. A woman in a red dress leaned toward her husband. "Isn't that Keanu Reeves?" she whispered. Her husband squinted, then nodded slowly. "It is. The Matrix actor. What's he doing flying alone?" Across the aisle, the businessman in the silver suit, who had already defended him once, had his phone subtly raised, camera recording. His voice was low but clear enough for those nearby to hear. "This man just asked for a glass of water, and she's treating him like a criminal." Layla, now aware of the murmurs, straightened her posture. Her cheeks flushed, and insecurity quickly turned into defiance. "Excuse me, everyone," she said firmly, raising her voice just enough. "We're doing our job professionally. Please don't interfere." Keanu turned slightly toward her and said in his gentle tone, "Miss, it's all right. You don't need to explain. I'm fine." But his words only made it worse. The calmness in his voice, his refusal to argue, made her anger grow. She took it as mockery. "Sir, please stop trying to instruct me how to do my job," she snapped. The entire cabin went silent. Even the soft hum of the engines seemed to fade for a moment. All eyes turned toward her. Keanu blinked once, then smiled. That same quiet, almost spiritual smile. "I'm not trying to," he replied softly. "I'm just asking for a little kindness." That line, spoken so simply, hit every heart in the room. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Passengers began to whisper again, their sympathy shifting entirely toward Keanu. One older man muttered, "That woman's out of line." Another added, "How can she talk like that to anyone, let alone him?" Layla felt the attention, the invisible pressure of dozens of eyes judging her. Her pride flared. "Sir," she said tightly, "I'll be reporting this behavior to the captain." Keanu sighed quietly and leaned back in his seat. "Do what you must," he said. "I'll be right here." The businessman shook his head, whispering to his phone, "Unbelievable! Keanu Reeves, humiliated on a flight to London." And as the plane sliced through the darkening sky, those few words, recorded in that small cabin, would soon ripple far beyond those clouds. Because truth travels fast, and when kindness is mocked, the world tends to notice. The hum of the engines grew louder as the Emirates A380 cruised above the vast desert night. The stars outside shimmered like silver dust scattered across velvet darkness. But inside the cabin, something far less peaceful was unfolding. Layla, the air hostess, stood by the galley, breathing quickly. Her pride was wounded, her authority questioned. The murmurs from the passengers replayed in her mind, their whispers, their eyes, their phones. And Keanu Reeves's calm silence only made it worse. She pulled out the intercom and called softly, "Captain, could I speak with you privately?" A moment later, Captain Omar, a seasoned pilot with years of calm skies behind him, stepped out of the cockpit. "What's the issue?" he asked, his tone firm but patient. Layla straightened. "There's a passenger in first class. He's being difficult, sir. Disrespectful. Making comments toward the crew." Omar frowned. "Name?" She hesitated. "Keanu Reeves." The captain blinked, as if not sure he'd heard correctly. "The actor?" "Yes," she replied quickly. "But that's not the point. He's causing disruption. I think we may need security on standby." Captain Omar rubbed his forehead. "All right, I'll come take a look." Back in the cabin, Keanu was still seated quietly, gazing out the window, unaware that his calm composure had been twisted into an accusation. The businessman in the silver suit noticed the captain approaching and whispered to his wife, "Here we go." The captain stopped beside Keanu's seat. "Mr. Reeves," he said politely, "I've received a report that there's been some disturbance. Is everything all right?" Keanu looked up slowly, surprised. "A disturbance?" His voice was low, calm. "I just asked for water, twice." The captain's eyes flickered toward Layla, who stood a few steps back, her face stiff with defiance. "Sir, the crew says you've been uncooperative." Keanu smiled faintly, a weary human smile. "If being quiet is uncooperative, then maybe I am guilty." A few passengers couldn't help but speak up. "Captain, that's not true," said the man in the silver suit. "I saw everything. The hostess has been rude from the start." Another passenger added, "He didn't even raise his voice." The cabin began to stir again. Murmurs, cameras, tension thick enough to cut. The captain held up a hand. "Please, everyone, stay calm. We'll handle this professionally." Then turning to Layla, he said quietly, "We'll file an incident report after landing." But Layla's pride wouldn't let go. "Captain, with all due respect, I don't feel safe." He glared at me. It was threatening. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Keanu's eyes softened, disbelief crossing his face. "Threatening?" he repeated softly. "I've said less than 10 words since takeoff." The captain hesitated, torn between authority and truth. Finally, he stepped back and murmured to his co-pilot through the radio. "Prepare to divert to Doha. Security will meet us on landing." The voice of the captain broke the silence over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to a minor security concern, we'll be making an unscheduled landing in Doha. Please remain seated." The announcement sent a ripple through the cabin. Passengers looked at each other in confusion, then at Keanu Reeves, who sat motionless, his face calm, but eyes distant. He didn't need to ask what the security concern was. He already knew. Outside, the endless desert glowed faintly under the moonlight. The plane began to descend, the sound of the engines deepening as the horizon tilted. Inside, tension thickened. Flight attendants whispered to each other, avoiding Keanu's gaze. Layla stood near the galley, arms crossed, a mix of anxiety and pride tightening her features. The businessman in the silver suit leaned across the aisle. "This is madness," he whispered. "They're actually diverting the flight because of you. And you haven't even done anything." Keanu smiled faintly. "Sometimes the truth takes a longer route to land," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the hum of the plane. Minutes later, the A380 touched down on the runway at Hamad International Airport. Blue and red lights flashed outside the windows, airport security vehicles waiting like silent wolves. Passengers craned their necks, phones ready. Some recorded, others whispered prayers. As the plane stopped, the cabin lights flicked on, bright, harsh, exposing every nervous face. The captain's voice came again, tighter this time. "Please remain seated. Security will be boarding shortly." The door opened with a heavy metallic hiss. Two Qatari security officers stepped in, tall, serious, their boots echoing against the cabin floor. The air hostess, Layla, stepped forward quickly, pointing toward Keanu's seat. "That's him," she said, her voice trembling slightly but trying to sound professional. "The passenger in question." The officers turned toward Keanu. One of them spoke politely but firmly. "Sir, we've received a report. Please stand up and come with us." Keanu looked up, his calmness unwavering. "Can I ask what this is about?" "Just a precaution," the officer replied. "We'll explain at the terminal." The businessman rose to his feet. "This is ridiculous. He hasn't done anything wrong." Several passengers murmured in agreement, their voices overlapping. One woman shouted from behind, "That's Keanu Reeves! He's innocent!" But rules were rules. The officers gently but firmly took Keanu by the arm. The clicking of handcuffs echoed like thunder in the silence. The moment felt unreal. The world's most humble star, restrained like a criminal. Keanu didn't resist. He stood, bowed his head slightly, and said softly, "It's all right. Let them do their job." As he walked down the aisle, every passenger's eyes followed him. Phones filmed, hearts ached. The flashing lights outside painted the cabin in alternating shades of red and blue. The humid night air of Doha carried a heavy silence as Keanu Reeves was escorted through the bright corridors of the airport's security terminal. The fluorescent lights above flickered softly, reflecting off the polished tiles. Cameras flashed in the distance. Airport staff whispering as they recognized the man walking calmly in handcuffs. He didn't speak. He didn't argue. His quiet dignity spoke louder than any defense. Inside the security office, officers reviewed documents and footage, while Keanu sat on a metal chair, hands resting lightly in his lap. His only request was simple. "Please call my assistant. She'll explain everything." The officer, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, hesitated. "Mr. Reeves, I've seen many cases, but yours doesn't feel right." Keanu gave a faint smile. "It's okay. The truth always takes the scenic route." Meanwhile, back on the Emirates A380, chaos brewed. Passengers argued with the remaining crew, demanding explanations. The businessman in the silver suit, now a reluctant hero, uploaded his recording to social media. The caption read, "Keanu Reeves humiliated and falsely accused by Emirates staff. Watch how calmly he handles it." Within minutes, the video exploded across the internet. Hashtags like "Justice for Keanu" and "Respect Kindness" trended worldwide. Millions watched as the clip spread, the hostess's sharp tone, Keanu's gentle replies, the captain's intervention. Comment sections flooded with outrage. "How could they treat him like that? He's the kindest soul in Hollywood." He didn't even raise his voice once. By the time Keanu sat quietly in the interrogation room, the CEO of Emirates was already on a video call with the Doha authorities. His face was pale, his voice urgent. "Release him immediately. We have made a terrible mistake." Airport security replayed the cabin footage. The truth unfolded clearly. Layla's arrogance, her false report, the passengers defending Keanu. Every frame screamed of injustice. The officer in charge turned to Keanu. "Mr. Reeves, you're free to go. We owe you an apology." Keanu stood slowly, rubbing his wrists where the handcuffs had been. He didn't look angry, only tired. "No apology necessary," he said softly. "We all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them." Outside, reporters and cameras had already gathered. As Keanu stepped out, the crowd erupted, flashes lighting up the night. A journalist shouted, "Mr. Reeves, what do you have to say about what happened?" He paused, looking at the sea of faces, microphones, and flashing bulbs. His voice was calm, measured, and deeply human. "Kindness doesn't depend on who you are," he said. "It depends on who they are when no one's watching." The crowd fell silent. The next morning, every news channel played that line. Emirates issued a public apology. Layla was suspended pending review. And across the world, people once again saw Keanu Reeves not as a superstar, but as a man whose grace. Morning sunlight poured through the glass walls of the Emirates headquarters in Dubai, turning the marble floors into a sea of gold. Reporters filled the conference room, their cameras pointed toward a long white podium adorned with the airline's red logo. The air buzzed with tension, guilt, and expectation. On the front row sat Keanu Reeves, dressed in a simple charcoal gray suit, no tie, his hair loosely brushed back. He didn't need to command attention. His silence did that for him. The CEO of Emirates, a dignified man with silver hair, stood at the podium, face pale under the bright lights. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice trembling slightly, "on behalf of Emirates Airlines, I want to publicly apologize to Mr. Keanu Reeves for the unfortunate incident that took place aboard our flight to London." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as screens behind him played short clips from the viral video. The image of Keanu's calm face under pressure had already become symbolic, a portrait of humility against arrogance. The CEO continued, "After reviewing all footage and passenger statements, it is clear that Mr. Reeves behaved with utmost respect and patience. The situation arose from a grave misunderstanding and a failure of professionalism on our part. We are deeply sorry." He turned toward Keanu, bowing slightly. "We hope Mr. Reeves can forgive us." Cameras flashed as Keanu slowly stood up. His expression was gentle, unreadable, but his eyes carried that familiar depth, the kind that speaks before words do. He walked to the microphone. The room fell completely silent. He began softly, "Thank you for your words. I believe apology is not about blame. It's about growth." He paused, glancing at the faces before him. Journalists, executives, crew members, and somewhere near the back, Layla, the air hostess, stood with her hands trembling. Her eyes were red, her guilt written across her face. Keanu continued, his voice warm and steady. "What happened on that flight? It wasn't just about me. It was about how we treat each other when no one's watching. Sometimes power and pride blind us. But sometimes, being humbled gives us sight." A reporter asked, "Mr. Reeves, do you forgive the person who accused you?" Keanu smiled faintly. "Forgiveness isn't for them," he said. "It's for peace." Then, turning slightly, his eyes found Layla's. She looked frozen, afraid to breathe. Keanu nodded to her just once and said quietly into the microphone, "We all make mistakes. What matters is who we become after them." Tears filled Layla's eyes as she covered her mouth, whispering, "I'm sorry." Keanu bowed slightly and stepped back. The room erupted, not in chaos, but in applause. It wasn't the applause for a movie star, but for a human being who turned humiliation into grace. That evening, headlines across the world read, "Keanu Reeves forgives airline. Kindness is greater than revenge." And somewhere in a quiet Dubai hotel room,